Principal Matters Podcast, episode 294. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, we're talking about ensuring staff and student voice with my special guest, Brent Kline. Brent Kline is the principal of Palo Alto High School in Palo Alto, California. His previous administrative roles included 4 years at Santa Cruz High School. He began his education career as a teacher in Clovis, California, and served as a teacher and principal at Mariner High School, Everett, Washington State, for more than 2 decades. In 2013, he was the Washington State High School Principal of the Year, and in 2014, a finalist for NASSP's National Principal of the Year program. As the Washington State High School Principal of the Year, his commitment to literacy and academic excellence resulted in a 10-year increase in the percentage of students meeting standards in reading and writing. Brent was named the principal of Palo Alto High School, Pally as they call it, beginning his new position in the fall of 2020. And although his position began at the height of the pandemic and virtual learning, he continued the important task of including student and staff voice to ensure the involvement of the entire school community, with the immediate task of providing positive and relevant learning experiences through the challenges of the pandemic. Beginning in January of 21, Brent began facilitating conversations and learning opportunities with his staff and students around equity, with a focus on equitable guiding practices. With the help of equity expert Enid Lee, Brent has led both staff and students in a variety of conversations designed to unpack the effects of current grading practices while exploring new and innovative practices that he could implement for the needs of students in this ever-changing world. He holds a bachelor's degree from California State University at Hayward and a master's degree from Western Washington University. He has presented at numerous conferences across the U.S., and this past year has been partnering with me for weekly executive coaching sessions through Principal Matters. Brent Kline, my friend, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. It is such a pleasure to not only be in the room with you, which we talk often, but to record this session together. Why don't you fill in the holes on that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
I want to first talk about, you talk about how your guests are inspiring. Well, I want to let you know and your listeners know that you've been absolutely the most inspiring colleague that I've had in such a long time. And I appreciate the time that we've been able to speak weekly. What they don't know about me, I've been a musician most of my entire life. And prior to being a principal, I was a band and orchestra teacher. And I still continue that conducting, that orchestration into every work that I do as a principal. My instruments are now people, and their students and their staff and their families. And I think my job is to allow and to ensure that every single voice, every single instrument gets to be part of the wonderful piece of music that we're working on or that we're performing. And so right now it's school, and we're trying to ensure that every student has voice, every staff member has voice, and most importantly, my job is to make sure that we play in tune, because there's nothing worse than an ensemble that doesn't play in tune.
Well, Brent, I've always said that band directors make great administrators, and for so many reasons, but not only because of the combination of creativity and organization, but because you've always learned how to take crazy groups and turn them into something beautiful. Yeah. And I think that's what principals do every single day. You work in an amazing place. I've had the privilege of sitting with you week after week and just hearing about the wonderful things happening at Palo Alto High School. Tell us a little bit more about your school. And then I would really like this conversation to include ways that you have involved students and staff in leadership since coming to Palo Alto.
Sure. Palo Alto High School, or Pally, like we call it. Its original opening date here on this campus was 1918. It's a curious connection because 1918 was the big pandemic that experienced back in that day, and the school didn't open until December because of the pandemic. Last year was my first year, so it was like I just kept on getting this connection about, oh my God, is history repeating itself? Well, it kind of did a little bit, and we didn't open until a little bit after they did back in 1918. But the most important thing that I would like to tell and to share with you is that this place, Palo Alto High School, is the most dynamic, rich, culturally rich, and really it's a school with spirit that has never died throughout any of the struggles, and especially through the pandemic. Even when there was no kids here, you could still feel it. It was still alive somewhere. And I think that's the biggest joy that I have each and every day, is to continue the Pali tradition, continue the strong, not only school spirit, but community spirit that just kind of, it comes in and out of our campus daily. We sit right across from Stanford University, and Palo Alto community itself is, it's in the heart of the Silicon Valley, and there's lots of people with lots of options and opportunities here. And there's also, I think, the thing that also is something we deal with on a daily basis is just the continued pressure that our students are under. It's either they create it themselves, or it's within their family or their parents or their community. The trying to do the best academically continues to be, I think, the number one priority for so many of our students. And I also noticed, and especially as we came back throughout the pandemic and opening up our school this year, yes, building on the tradition of strong academics is absolutely important, but I also realized that the number one thing that our students need to relearn how to do, and that's to play. And I think that that's something that I've really focused on, in providing students with opportunities to connect with each other outside of their classes, and to provide some really structured ways for them to reconnect and find that lost, emotional connection, and with their friends and their parents alike, and their teachers especially.
Well, you work in an amazing place, and if listeners had the privilege to see into your office like I do, they would see that you have these amazing windows that look out onto the green of your campus. And of course, you've told me that amazing building you're sitting in that was built in 1918 is going to be renovated next year, so you don't get to spend most of next year by those beautiful windows on that part of the campus. But you guys also have some amazingly rich traditions too. Your kids are always involved in things that make me smile. It even through the pandemic, the ways that you guys connected during that time and since then too. But Brent, you touched on this before. This is not your first rodeo. You've led in schools for a long time, and Washington State for a couple of decades, and then coming back to your place of your origins of California now as a leader there. And one of the things that you and I have talked about is, as you have transitioned, and I'm so glad you brought it full circle from the history of your school through the pandemic. I had forgotten that the origins of your school was during the 1918 first flu pandemic that came through America, and then you stepped in right when this century was experiencing its. How have you included staff and students in your leadership? Because I know that's been a big commitment that you've made, stepping in really as a new leader during the pandemic, but now that now that this is home, this has become a common way for you to engage others in leadership.
Well, I opened a school without anybody at the school. And I was leading people for several months that I had never met, including students. And I was also opening up a school, or a school year rather, in a time where everybody wants the answer. My first site council meeting that I did with Palo Alto High School, I had over 600 people participating on the Zoom call. And usually you're used to, as principal, maybe 6 people might show up for a site council. So that was like overwhelming, and really something that really didn't dissipate for the entire first year. There was a lot of information that was needed, and a lot of people needed to be involved. From the school leadership level, I wanted to, as quickly as possible, really understand how this school has been led, and how, particularly from the teacher standpoint, what is it they, I didn't want to come from a deficient question. It was, well, what are you doing well? And what is this excellence that you have been driving to, and these systems that you've created, and these opportunities and programs that kids get, which this school has so many options and opportunities. But that's because over the years, they have adapted and really made sure that students are being accommodated with their current needs. And so it's an ongoing change. From beginning to understand, we have our department chairs, they're called instructional leaders, and understanding how they functioned and how they worked well together within their department. And the first thing that I noticed is that they work well with departments, but yet the school connectedness throughout all of the departments was something that really needed to be focused on. And that's been a lot of our work in terms of identifying systems and practices that we all do, and what are these practices that we can do similar within each department, so that our students have more of an equitable experience in their lives every single day. And so that's been ongoing, and really unpacking what does equity mean, and what are equitable experiences that we should provide, and that we already are providing for students. We do all this work for students, and I think all too often we forget that we need to include them into the workings, into the providing suggestions, and we need to stop and pause and listen. It was when I was in Santa Cruz that I created a principal advisory committee, and it was because I had to facilitate a selection for student school board rep. And I had like a dozen kids that wanted to do that. And so I did interviews, and I was like, well, what do I do with these other students that wanted to be involved? And from there came a principal advisory committee, and it's evolved over the year. And how it is now that I introduced it to Pally is I have a student membership of 4 students per grade level, and they have to apply, and then I interview them. This year I had about 80 students apply, so I interviewed every single student, because why wouldn't I, if they wanted to be part of this? And it's not just 4 because I couldn't decide. So there's 5 in this grade, and 5, I think it's actually 5 now in every class. I just couldn't cut that many people out of it. And we meet once a month, and I provide them lunch. And it might be we might have a scheduled question and answer that I need some specific questions answered from them based on their experiences, or they just bring their particular needs that they feel are necessary to be looked at from a student's perspective. And so that's pretty important to me, to pause and to listen. I do that every single day. I will ask a student something every single day, and to ensure that their voice gets included in our work, I've started to actually bring them to staff meetings with us, to professional development sessions. They might show up live, or they might show up. I've done a couple of student videos to bring the student voice in on particular topics. And the last event that we did just last week was created a student podcast on some of their experiences.
Wow. Well, Brent, I want to back up. There's so many things that you said there that are so powerful. And Principal Matters listeners, I just want to encourage you. I know that at the time of this recording, you're listening to this as we wrap up a school year. And so you're probably beginning to think about ways that you wish you were involving kids now, but you also may be thinking about things that you would like to put away for ideas for next year. And in either case, Brent, you said a couple of things that I want to circle back to. One, you talked about, as you got to know your students and staff, you realized what was working well, but you also realized the need to better connect across disciplinary areas so that you could see common themes happening across the school that might need to be addressed. And I know from conversations with you that has led to some changes. One of those areas I believe that you've really focused on is equity. And you mentioned Enid Lee. In the introduction, we mentioned that she's been working with you guys. For Principal Matters listeners, Enid Lee was a guest on this show for episode 268. I looked it up, Brent, so I could remember when she was on the show. She's an amazing person, and I would encourage anyone to go back and listen to her podcast where she talks about her work with schools across the U.S. and Canada on equity issues. But Brent, as you've worked with your teachers and your students together, you've seen some things that have some outcomes and responses, I think, that have been both encouraging and surprising and sometimes challenging. Talk a little bit about that. What are some of the outcomes that you've seen? And I know some of that led up to the podcast that we'll talk about in just a minute, but what are some of the outcomes and responses you've seen as you have included staff and student voice?
Well, I would say the biggest outcome that probably shouldn't surprise me, but is that there's some great things going on at my school here. There's awesome teachers with great programs that they've created, these kids that excel and really care about their school. They're in it for the long haul, and they're in it because they care about the teachers and staff care about kids, and vice versa. These kids are genuine and very respectful. They're a great group of kids. I've not seen this in a long time, and so there's a lot of resilience here that has been unpacked, and there's a lot of also vulnerability going on here, because people are starting to talk about their practice, and we're starting to challenge what it is that we've done. I talked earlier about the great traditions that have been here at Palo Alto High School. Sometimes traditions are meant to be over a particular time, and maybe they don't need to always travel through the next era. And I think that's exactly what we need to start doing, is really look at what we do to ensure that it's reflecting the students of today, because the students of today, and you and me and everybody else, all of us have experienced a change in our lives that has kind of evened the playing field all over again. And so now this is the best time for us to start thinking about what we do. And through our facilitation with Enid, especially, who is a gym, and I recommend all of you hook up with Enid at one point. It took us a year at least just talking about what equity is, and to defining what is equitable experiences for kids, what is not, what are some of our systems in place, in whether it's our content or our assessment practices, or how we hire people, or how we interact with each other and staff. What are some things that are stopping us from this sort of change that's necessary? And then we also kind of took our conversation just recently, because I paused. This is not going as fast as I thought, because it's just been a crazy year and a half. And we're now starting to talk about our practices within the classroom, but specifically about grading, and how we think about our grading practices that have virtually remained unchanged for way too long in schools. And I got to tell you, it's been hard, but it's just been awesome experiences listening to staff members change their perspective, regain some new practices, and ultimately, I have tried my best to stay out of it and just to help guide the conversations and the practices and the opportunities for staff to learn through each other, and to purposely group them with people they don't hang out with. Like, I don't need 7 math teachers to talk about this practice. I need a math, an English, a social studies. I need an eclectic group, because I think that the learning is so much deeper that way. And the best thing that could come out of our work happened in this last month, and it came from staff members. And we've identified some school-wide practices, not that we're going to implement, but we're going to talk about, and we're going to agree upon making them work next year. And there's 4 little buckets, or maybe they're big buckets right now, but one area is student redemption. How can we start talking about being more available to change our deadlines, or allow students to take retakes, or maybe that 100-point scale is not the best for grades. Or then looking at clear communication, how can we be clear about what we expect for students in my class, but in every class, and how consistent can we be? And consistency was our next area, and just looking at are we grading expectations in content areas the same, course alike, and finally, how do we continue to include our student voice and provide them with choice in not only what they're experiencing, but how change is occurring around them. Yeah, man, I don't know if I just answered your question. I felt like I
Oh,
went
you
on a little
did.
bit.
And Brent, what's so wonderful about hearing you summarize this is I've had the privilege to sit with you through almost an entire school year, week on week, listening to you share those next steps. And so for Principal Matters listeners, you're getting an overview of something that I've been able to watch Brent lead, not alone, but collaboratively with his administrative team, with his teachers' input. You shared a book with your staff, Grading for Equity: What Is, Why It Matters, and How It Can Transform Schools and Classrooms by Joe Feldman. And you sent me a copy, a book that you guys have used as a resource for just prodding conversations, asking questions, trying to move yourself forward as a school that's had a lot of traditions that you are helping your teachers question. And I love those 4 takeaways: student redemption, clear communication, consistency, and student voice and choice. And I know that leads us into the question I was going to ask you next, Brent, which is, as you have created more opportunities for students to have voice, you've discovered within your school a student population within your student population of kids that didn't feel like they had a voice. And
Yeah.
so tell us that story, and tell us how that story led to the podcast that your kids put together that you recently shared with your staff.
Yeah. Yeah. And you would think at Palo Alto High School, equity wouldn't be a conversation you would necessarily have. It's diverse, but not the most diverse place. Part of our student population is, specifically talking is our work with our African American students, where we have less than 2%. And it's small enough that you could ignore it, but it's small enough that you can't. And you can't ignore what? You can't ignore their experience. And it's important to me, especially with this population of students, is to really sit and pause and ask, what is it that can be done as an African American student? What is it that's being done that for you from our teachers that it's gone well? What are things that can be done that can be better? And then, what do we need in place to ensure that not only do you feel safe, but also that your voice is heard, and that you are feeling part of the fabric of Palo Alto High School and not excluded. It's been a wonderful experience, and listening to some of the struggles that some of our students have, but the podcast that we did, and I purposely, it was those 3 questions or those 3 points. Those are our questions. Is that I want to know that what has gone well, because within that question comes out what hasn't gone well. And this podcast that we did, and it went in line with we had a department that shared, because you're not going to move any of this work or any work forward unless you start having your staff share what they've accomplished and share what they've learned, because to me, they are the best teachers of teachers. I hardly ever will bring in a person that's going to sell a program, because I never think that ever works for the schools that I've been at. I'll take pieces of them, but I think that you need to be real careful about what it is that you're bringing. And so a lot of our work, and a lot of the work in most of my career, has actually been created and supported by the teachers within the building, because you don't have to go far to find the excellent work. So anyway, we had some a particular issue with a concern brought up by some of our African American students through our BSU program to our social studies and our history department about the use of an N-word in some of their delivery of lessons and such. And so this podcast and the presentation from this department came out in front of our staff, so that they can also see what's been going on and what has transpired through our work on Focus on Equity.
Well, and the beautiful thing about that podcast, Brandon, thank you for sharing it with me. It was 12 minutes of a variety of student voices. And I know that you had actually taken a couple of hours of conversation and they had edited it down to just 12 minutes of takeaways from a variety of students across campus, just sharing ways that they felt challenged, but ways that they felt heard, and ways your school has grown in the way that it has reached. In fact, I ask you for permission to share just 1 minute of just one student voice from that podcast with our listeners. And can you set this up for just a moment? And if you don't mind sharing the name of the student, and if I can share that in the show notes later, but set this up for just a moment. And I'm going to share that audio here after you give us a little bit of context.
The point of this particular clip that you will hear is it's actually a concern that a student brought up with her teacher, and the conversation wasn't just once, it went on and on and on. But yet the beauty of it is that our teacher listened and adapted and changed. And you know what? The most important piece is went back and asked, did that help you? And I think if you don't do that, then you might as well not. I don't know. It's just important. I don't know where I was going with that, but it's just really important to really follow up on what you do to bring change into schools.
Well, I'm going to play just this 1 minute clip here. Or this might be a minute and a half, but I want to just hear the student's voice together. And then, Brent, if you want to make the entire podcast available to listeners, but let's listen to that student story.
My history teacher, and I had butt heads about it. And at one point, he asked me, he was like, what would you like me to do so it can be more comfortable for you? And I told him, I was like, it was about the use of the N-word. He was like, what can I do to better it? And I told him, I was like, just make sure you address it and stuff. Make sure no one repeats it, says it anywhere and stuff, because it's already discomforting enough to be the only black student there, but it's harder when you're the black student and people are saying slurs around you. It just makes you even more uncomfortable. So he asked me what he can do to better it, and when the unit came around, he fixed it and it made it better, and I felt a lot more comfortable. I did really well on my final project for it. I was really happy and satisfied what he did to make the issue better. So I think it's just communication. We checked in about it, and I told him he was doing great. I think it's going a lot better in that class, and my grades even higher because I'm more comfortable. So I'm able to pursue myself more academically when I am comfortable. So I think it was just a relationship and a communication. And a lot of the times people complain, but when people ask them what do they want, they never know the answer. And so when he asked me that, I felt really great because I knew what I wanted, and the fact that he did it made me feel even better.
Brent, I just love listening to her voice. And I know from conversations with you that that's just the end of a very long story, a story that involved a lot of collaboration of an openness on the part of the student's teacher, openness on the part of the student, openness on your part to facilitate a place where they got to a point of trust with one another. What other thoughts would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I got to give Enid credit on that, because she was the one that interviewed the students, and she does an awesome job at doing that. I mean, but you could just play that clip. I could listen to that clip over and over again, just that 1 minute, because it's so rich. And Isis, the student, who's a remarkable young lady, I mean, she talked about it. It's right there, folks, right? Relationships and connections. What else do you need to help not only our students feel safe and supported, but also the adults? And again, talking, I just love how she talked about, and we checked in and I told him he was doing okay. I mean, yeah, if you knew Isis, you'd go, yeah, that's what Isis would say. Because she's just a remarkable kid that once, not only she's probably the smartest kid I've met in a long time, and she cares deeply, not only about her family, but herself. And I think also her community here at Palo. So,
well, Brent, kudos to the work that you've been doing this year on including staff and student voice. And Principal Matters listeners, you're just getting a taste of some rich conversations that Brent and I have had throughout the school year. So Brent, thank you for sharing those summaries and just letting everyone get a small glimpse. A lot of conversations that you have aren't things you can share because they're confidential. Right. But I want to just congratulate you for stepping into a school at one of the hardest times in the history of education, figuring out how to listen, connect, build trust, and not only just connect as a new leader, but also rally people together so that they became a more trusting work environment for staff and for students. And I know you well enough to know that you are just looking at this as, I'm just beginning, Will. There's just so much to do here. But I just wanted to congratulate you and share your story also as an example for others who may want to think about ways that they can include student voice or staff inclusion in their leadership too. I want to ask you some other questions about some of the time that we spent together, but any other thoughts you wanted to add to that before we change the topics?
Yeah, no, but thank you for those great comments. And it's, I wouldn't be a principal. I couldn't be a principal if I didn't include students. And I'm not I don't focus on just one, students or teachers or parents or community. It's all the time, and one might shine and rise above the other for a particular time. But it's the continued building of trust through opportunities of voice through everybody that's involved in this process. So I can't do it alone.
We've had the privilege of connecting almost weekly for, I've lost count of how long we've been connecting, Brent, but this entire school year for weekly executive coaching meetings. Talk a little bit about that. Why is executive coaching something that you reached out to connect with me about, and what have been some of the lessons, challenges, or benefits that you have gained from those experiences?
You wouldn't think, so this is my 19th year of being a high school principal. You wouldn't think that I needed to be coached, right? I mean, I got it. And I could have continued on without, our connection. And that would just be me being the same old guy that I was, or same old principal. I know that changing jobs, going to a different school, and the pandemic, it was just, I needed something. I needed somebody to talk with. And, I started listening to your podcasts because I have a commute, and I've never really had a commute, about a 45-minute, but it's beautiful because I started and ended on the Pacific Ocean. So that's really cool to see that. And I started dabbling into podcasts, and that's where I found you. And then that you have these opportunities for coaching. And I just felt that I needed a reboot, and I needed somebody to help ask me awesome questions like you always do. And you don't back down, which is great because principals need somebody like that. And just your connections to other people's thoughts and recommendations that I continue to hear on the podcast, but specifically in our conversations, I can't say how grateful I am, or I'm grateful for the opportunities to share things with you that I generally wouldn't do with other folks. And I do it because I trust you, and I do it because of you have experiences, and you have continued experiences. And I mean, you've hooked me up with some pretty brilliant people that in fact, I'm going to bring one of those brilliant people to my school in the fall. So it's been a great avenue for opportunity, especially for this guy that's been doing this for a long time. It's renewed me, and it's also opened my heart to different ways of thinking. So thank you, Will.
Wow. Well, Brent, thank you. It's hard to hear all of those. It's hard to hear all of that from you and not feel emotional. And so it's usually when I'm hosting podcasts, I am listening and thinking about what's the next thing I'm going to ask, and I'm just almost at a loss for words. But thank you for your for such gracious feedback, and it's an honor to connect with your leadership and to have watched you practice the things that you talk about. And anytime we step into an area of new challenge, you are quick to take action. And the best part for me is I get to weekly follow up and watch what's happening next. And it hasn't come without battles and obstacles and challenges that you've had to manage throughout your campus, and like every school leader. But it has just been such a privilege to be able to have a small part in watching these things unfold through your school year. I want leaders to be able to know how they can connect with you, Brent, because I know that someone's listening to this right now who could either relate to wanting to be able to connect with other people for coaching, or listening to ideas and wanting to know, well, how can I connect with someone like Brent? And you can connect with Brent. Brent, why don't you share how folks can stay connected with you And then any parting words of advice that you would have for school leaders?
Sure. Okay, so I'm embarrassed to say I don't have Twitter. I don't have any of that stuff. So simple email, B as in Brent, B Kline, BKLINE @PAUSD.org is the best way. Yeah, I keep saying I'll work on the Twitter and Instagram stuff. What's the most important thing I want to leave with is everybody's changing. Everything's changing. We're part of change right now. And we'll never return back to the schools that we knew or the life that we knew. And so I want principals to know that this, as a building leader, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to really think how we do school and to really bring those voices out of the woodwork that we don't generally hear, because everybody has opinions and everybody has thoughts, and however and whatever you can do to incorporate them into the plan, into the agreed recommendations or whatever it is, I think the better we'll be. And then finally, I would say that talking about things is important, but until you do it, it's not worth talking about. And so, really be thoughtful on what outcomes are going to be. What is it going to look like from your perspective as a principal when you do it? And yeah, I'm going to say, just do it. Just do what you think is right.
Well, Brent Kline, it has been such a privilege to watch you listen and do it all the time. And Principal Matters listeners, I just want to encourage you, as you are ensuring staff and student voice in your schools, it's never too late to ask the right questions, to pull people together, to think about how you can increase that engagement. And if you want to reach out to Brent Kline, I will share his email in the show notes, so you can always check the website at williamdparker.com for this episode with Brent Kline to connect with him. Brent Kline, thank you so much for the opportunity to share your story and one of your student voices with Principal Matters listeners. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you for doing what matters, and we'll talk to you next week. You can find free resources like this one at my website at williamdparker.com.